These performance projects position the body as a kind of evolutionary architecture for operation and awareness in the world. In other words, here we have the biological architecture of the body, and when you add technology to it, you can extend its operational capabilities. So the body is not seen as a site for the psyche, nor for social inscription, but rather the body is seen as a structure, not as an object of desire, but possibly an object for redesigning. Well, I discovered I was a really bad painter in art school. So I really began doing performance right from the beginning, and also as a person who was more interested in the idea of the body as not only a medium of expression, but also as a means of experience. So I was always envious of gymnasts or singers or dancers who use their body as part of their art form. The first suspension performances involved using ropes and harnesses. So the body was kind of positioned in space, but it seemed more supported than suspended. When I came across some images of Hindu-Indian piercing, I got the idea, well, perhaps we can suspend the body in this way, and this would be a more elegant way of suspending the body. So with 18 hooks into the skin becomes part of the support structure of the body. The suspension performances were done in Japan, in Europe, in the United States, and in Australia. A lot of them were done in Japan, where I was living at the time, but some of the key performances, the tree suspension, happened in Australia. The Brisbane choreographed moving performance was another one here, and I did a performance in Melbourne, which was the shaft suspension, where the body was hoisted up and lowered down a lift well. The body here is seen not pursuing any kinds of transcendental strategies. There's no metaphysical concern. The body is seen here as a sculptural medium. The body is a sculpture inserted in a space amongst other sculptural elements. So often the works were site-specific. The body is not seen as a personality or a gender. The body is seen as an evolutionary architecture. Well, it's very difficult to insert the hooks into the skin. It requires two people. One person to pinch the skin up, away from muscle and bone, and another person with two hands to insert the hook, which is, quite a difficult procedure. So there's no anesthetic used. So if you can imagine not only one hook stuck through the skin, but 18 altogether. And then finally, the most difficult part, of course, is when the body has to fully support its own weight. The seaside suspension was done on an outcrop of rocks about 300 metres from shore. No one really saw this performance except the artists who were helping me, and a group of fishermen sitting on a nearby outcrop of rocks. And typically in Japanese fashion, they were there fishing when we began our preparations. They kept fishing during the performance, and they were still fishing when we left. A few boats went past as well, and I guess they would have seen the suspension performance. But the body was side on, looking towards the horizon. So in a way, the body was simultaneously being distracted by the crashing of the waves below, but pacified by the serenity of the horizon within which it was directed. There were only two really major public performances involving the suspension events. One was in Copenhagen and the other in New York. With the New York suspension, we didn't get permission to do this performance, so we prepared the body in the fourth floor room. When everything was ready, we connected it to a pulley structure, and the cable had been stretched between the two buildings over East 11th Street. When everything was ready, the body rolls out of the fourth floor window and finishes in the middle of the street. I had a good view of the police cars that arrived after about 5 minutes. What was supposed to be a 30-minute suspension turned out to be only 12 minutes. The police had broken through one of the downstairs doors, which was initially locked, and when they pulled me in, quite embarrassingly, they demanded to see my ID, which was a bit difficult to produce under the circumstances. And interestingly, I was charged with not nudity in a public space or practicing some S&M ritual, but rather that I was a danger to the public. Had I fallen on someone, this would have been a problem. So yeah, it was a difficult performance to do. One was the Copenhagen event, and in this case, the movement was not just simply a horizontal movement, but rather a choreography using a large crane. The body was inserted with the hooks lying at street level. When everything was ready, it was connected to the cable, and the crane hoisted the body up about 60 meters, rotates the body around, and you have to also remember, because it was a windy evening, the body was rotating on its axis. After about 30 meters, all you could hear was the whooshing of the wind, the whirring of the crane motors, and the creaking of the skin. This was very much a choreography of the body. You know, as an artist, you consider the position of the body, its relationship to the other objects in the space, and the possible choreography of movement that occurs. The Brisbane performance similarly used an overhead gantry crane in an abandoned warehouse, and in this performance I was suspended vertically upright, and I was holding the control box, so then I could press the different switches which enabled me to lift or lower my body, move forwards or backwards, sideways, left to right, and also when I discovered that if I stopped suddenly, I could generate swinging movement. So that was the additional choreography as part of this performance. The rock suspension began with the body seated on the floor. The insertions were done. We had already suspended some rocks using slip knots from eye bolts in the ceiling, and then when everything was ready, the cables were connected to the hooks, and by quickly tugging and releasing the slip knots on each of the cables. As the rocks came down, the body came up. So finally you had the body balanced by those ring of rocks. I stopped the performance after about 20 minutes when the telephone rang in the gallery, and that sort of like interrupted the kind of meditative moment, right? But so that performance was stopped because of a telephone ringing. Each performance was different depending on the circumstance and the process. These suspension events weren't planned with any kind of symbolic or metaphoric positioning. In other words, the body was seen as a sculptural object, and it was a visual and aesthetic experience rather than a symbolic one. With the suspension events, the overriding realization is that the body is obsolete and often absent from its own agency. With the Third Hand project, here we have not only an exploration of the physical and psychological limitations of the body, but constructing additional extensions of the body. So the third hand is an addition to the body. It's a prosthesis not as a sign of lack as with an amputee, but rather as a symptom of excess. As technology proliferates, as it becomes microminiaturized, we can attach it to the human body. So the third hand is a visual attachment to the body that is actuated by my own muscle signals. So electrodes from my abdominal and leg muscles can activate the movements of the third hand. And I tried to do some practical things with this. For example, I was able to draw a circle, a square, a triangle simultaneously with my three hands, each drawing a different shape. I was able to write different letters simultaneously with the three hands, and finally to write the word evolution. And if you have to imagine, because of the spacing of the three hands, I had to learn to write every third letter. So the first three letters were E, L and I, then V, U and O, then O, T and N to complete the word evolution. And because this performance happened on a sheet of glass between the body and the audience, then I had to actually learn to write it back to front. I only learned to write two words, evolution and decadence, because they're both 9-letter words. The third hand was completed in 1980, and at the time it was a state-of-the-art prosthesis, and in fact so state-of-the-art that when I presented my third hand project at Caltech in Los Angeles, some NASA engineers saw the presentation and then invited me to do a presentation at NASA at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, and then also later arranged for me to do a presentation to the Extravehicular Activity Group at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. So the third hand, you know, in 1980 was a state-of-the-art prosthesis. The third hand had a pinch release, a grasp release, a 290-degree wrist rotation, clockwise and counterclockwise, and also a tactile feedback system for a sense of touch. Another way of augmenting the body is to do it virtually, and some of the earlier performances involved, for example, performing with a virtual body or constructing a virtual arm which was actuated by a pair of cyber gloves. So the body had not only a third hand but a virtual arm that it could manipulate and perform virtual tasks with. I really don't like to talk about art and science because it's too simplistic. One can't simply combine the two. One often uses technical means, new instruments, new imaging technology, robotics and engineering, virtual reality systems, the internet, but you're using them for an artistic pursuit with particular philosophical and peculiar poetic reasons. The artist can be a scientist in the kind of Renaissance sense, because there's too much specialist knowledge and technical expertise that goes far beyond any one individual. With the stomach sculpture, I needed the help of a jeweler and a microsurgery instrument maker. The jeweler was able to construct the external shell of the sculpture, but for the internal components, which were very, very small, I needed the assistance of a microsurgery instrument maker who had to construct some of these components under magnification. An artist with sculptural training could not make things that small, and even for a jeweler, some of the internal components had to be fashioned under magnification. So these projects involved expertise and specialist skills far beyond that of the artist to do by himself. So with the stomach sculpture, this obsolete body that has technology previously attached and performing involuntarily is now being invaded by technology. And this technology is incorporated inside the body, not because of some medical life support reason, but simply through artistic choice. I wanted to make a work for the inside of the body. The 5th Australian Sculpture Triennale's theme was site-specific works. But instead of a sculpture for a public space, this was designed for a private physiological space. And this sculpture was especially constructed. It's not a medical instrument. So it was especially built for the inside of the body. We used a medical instrument, though, an endoscope, to visually track the insertion of the sculpture inside the stomach. So there were 2 tubes going down the esophagus. One tube was the one with the control cables to the sculpture, and the other was the endoscope that videotaped the insertion. And there were several assistants during the filming of this insertion. In fact, we had to spend 2 days and 6 attempts to shoot about 15 minutes of video. And one person was assisting with the controlling of the sculpture. One person was shooting the video. I was lying side on, looking at everything and directing the whole process. This obsolete body that has technology attached now begins to perform involuntarily. In a series of performances which have lasted over a period of 13 years, I've experimented with the idea of electrical stimulation of the muscles so that involuntary movement is generated. So electrodes on my flexors, extenders, deltoid, bicep muscles, my thigh and calf muscles enable me, via a stimulation system, to computer program my body's movements. So a half of my body is involuntarily moving whilst the other half can improvise with local agency, a kind of split body experience. Not a split mind and body, but a split body experience. And so, for example, in this performance, using my extended arm, for 4 hours continuously, the body's left arm is involuntarily moving, whilst the body's right arm is extended by this 11 degree of freedom manipulator. We also discovered that not only could you program the body's movements in a local space, but this could be done remotely. In 1995, for example, in a performance called Fractal Flesh, my body was in Luxembourg, and people in the Pompidou Centre in Paris, the Media Lab in Helsinki, and the Doors of Perception conference in Amsterdam were able to remotely access my body through a touchscreen interface and choreograph its movements. So, for example, when you touched the computer model on the screen in Paris, a second later my body moved involuntarily in Luxembourg. And this performance was over a period of 2 days. My third hand was attached, so in this situation, people in other places were projecting their presence into another body elsewhere. For this body becomes a host for the desire of remote agents. Earlier prosthetic attachments or insertions, we're dealing with what we would normally call hard technology, stainless steel, electronic circuitry. With the extra ear, the idea was to construct a soft prosthesis, something constructed from my own skin and cartilage. And originally, the idea was to position this extra ear beside my real right ear. So there would be 2 ears on the right side of my face. I subsequently found that this is medically difficult and a little dangerous because the facial nerves come out from the cranium in that area where I wanted to attach the extra ear. So, there was a small danger that my right side might be paralyzed if that's where the ear was attached. And anyway, it was very, very difficult to find a reconstructive surgeon to assist in this project. There was one that agreed. Initially, we made plans for the surgery, but then changed his mind. And I think his other medical friends probably advised against him. We know that the medical community does experiments on people. We know that they do experiments on the aged, the injured and the ill, but not on consenting artists. So we've tried to kind of find other ways of doing this. With the assistance of Tissue Culture and Art Project in Perth, we're trying a new strategy, growing an ear using living cells. And if ultimately this is done using my own bone marrow cells or stem cells, then that could be attached to my arm, and I would have then an ear on my arm. I would always have something up my sleeve if this was finalised. The extra ear was never designed to hear. Rather, it was designed so that it would make sounds. With a sound chip and a proximity sensor implanted, anyone who came close to my ear would trigger a sound. In other words, the ear would speak to the person who comes close to me, and if no one came close to me, it would be programmed to randomly whisper sweet nothings into the other ear anyway. The largest prosthetic extension of the body comes with the Exoskeleton walking robot. And this is a 3 meter in diameter, 600 kilogram, pneumatically actuated machine. It's very powerful, very jerky. The body is standing on the machine, and it actually controls the movements of the machine with its arm gestures. So by making different arm gestures, the body selects the different walking movements. So the machine can go forwards, backwards, sideways, left and right. The machine can squat, it can stand up, it can turn on the spot. And we amplified the sounds of the mechanism. We had the amplified sounds of the relay switch clicks and the compressed air, and we had sensors on the legs to amplify the mechanical movements. And so there was this cacophony of sound which was composed by choreographing the movements of the machine. In other words, I was not only looking as to how I was walking, but I was also listening to the sounds that those walking movements were producing. So to change the sounds, I changed the movements. So what we're doing here is translating the human gait into a six-legged insect-like machine locomotion. In a further project called Hexapod, whose final result was the muscle machine using inflatable rubber muscles for the actuators, we came up with the idea that if I was to lift one leg, 3 robot legs would lift and swing forwards. If I lifted the other leg, the other 3 robot legs would lift and swing forward. So by simply stepping up and down on the spot, we could get the robot to walk. And by turning my body, the robot moves in the direction that I'm facing. So this was a much more intuitive and direct coupling of human and machine architectures. The prosthetic head is a kind of virtual augmentation, but this time, this prosthetic head, modelled to somewhat resemble the artist, has a database, real-time lip syncing, speech synthesis, so that if you interrogate the head with questions, it can respond, and it has a knowledge of the world. It has personal and professional information about the artist, and it has a lot of the artist's sort of ideas and philosophy. The head is constructed as a 3,000 polygon structure with a skin texture of my face wrapped around it. This prosthetic head has facial expressions, and we've stitched together an IBM text-to-speech engine. So with these software engines interfaced and interacting, it's possible for the head to respond in real time to your questions. It has a conversational strategy, so even if it doesn't know the answer to your question, it can change the subject matter, it can fudge the issue altogether, or sometimes it'll ask you a question back.
Sometimes the definition of art depends on the artist. Other times it depends on the critic.
I'm constantly programming the head so that its database is increasing. So for example, in a couple of years' time, the artist won't be able to take full responsibility for what his head says. I can't really describe it as an artificial intelligence. It's more like a conversational system. In a way, the head is only as intelligent as the person who's interrogating it. I question what we understand as artificial intelligence. In other words, if the head can effectively respond to your questions and generally conduct a conversation with you, it behaves in a kind of intelligent way. And so if it has appropriate behavior, to me, it's intelligent.
Okay. 30 spokes meet in the hub, but the empty space between them is the essence of the wheel. Pots are formed from clay, but the empty space within it is the essence of the pot. Walls with windows and doors form the house, but the empty space within it is the essence of the home.
You have to imagine this prosthetic head as projected 4 meters in height. So it's a very large head. It's projected in a completely dark room, so the head almost appears as if it's floating in the space. And as you walk into the room, the head is looking at you with its eyes closed. When you get to the plinth with the keyboard, the head turns, opens its eyes, and initiates the conversation with you. So there is an interactive element with the head. From growing the extra ear using biotechnology techniques and from constructing the prosthetic head, there's a new project that's now being done, which is called the partial head.
With the partial head, facial features such as the mouth, the nose, the eye and the ear will be grown in a cluster using primate cells. The partial head will be a partial portrait of the artist, partially living and not quite yet human. That is, it will be human in form, but primate in substance. The prosthetic head is a kind of digital, interactive portrait, whilst the partial head is a biotech, living portrait of the artist. The partial head will be done with tissue culture and art project in Perth. Thank you for your request. I